their culture. Their cultures, their communities, and their economies endure and continue to grow and thrive today. And it's, I'm really proud leading a network like Social Enterprise Network Victoria in supporting them in that journey. Thank you for coming today. We are going to jump straight in because we do have a really inspirational and insightful presentation from Helen today. We're going to try and break up the time in half. So first half, we'll hear from Helen with her presentation about her journey, her work in community development, linking that to the Wicked Lab tool and how it's helped her with that to really find even greater clarity and direction, but also to communicate the work that she's been doing in community development even more effectively and create new allies. So it's an exciting and insightful story, and we'll have time for some question and answer afterwards, and maybe some breakout rooms. So we'll just see how we go today. But thanks also for your patience for the technical issues. Helen, I'll throw it over to you.
I'm just going to unmute you, Helen. There we go.
Okay.
Stage is yours. Just let me know when I need to. Next slide.
Okay, something's just popped up. Just hang on. Okay. I'm living in the city of Maribyrnong, so it's located on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people. So I just want to also pay my respects to them as the traditional owners in my where I live. I pay respect to elders, past, present, emerging, and any First Nations people with us today. We acknowledge that this land was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to start with just a little bit of background about me. So I've been working as a community development practitioner and educator for over 35 years in various roles, in various sectors, in and out of universities or working in parallel in community and, teaching and lecturing in community development. It's more, community development can be a philosophy, a methodology, an approach, a framework, and it's all of those for me. I consider myself an embedded CD worker, and by that I mean that I live and work in the community that that I work in. Jim Ive calls that an internal community development worker, but I prefer the embedded term. My heartland is the western region of Melbourne, and this not only includes the metropolitan parts of Melbourne itself, but also the rural interface areas. And I'll explain in a minute why that's important, because that has an impact on how the boundaries of the work that I put into the tool for systemic change. Now, the West, for those of you who don't know the West, we call it, it's characterised by diverse landscapes. So we have, beautiful rivers, beaches, bayside areas, as well as open plains, and urban and rural kind of areas as well, beautiful urban and rural areas. It's called a nation country, so we have different nations who connect into and have, for millennia, connection to this country and care for country. But it's also seen a history of diverse settlement over the last 200 or so years. And that can be from early Irish settlers through to, kind of Syrian, Afghani, refugees moving into the area, all sorts. It's always had that settlement diversity, and it's characterised the West, which makes it really strong, by lots of diversity. So, and diversities as in, class, It's always been a known as a working class area in its history, but also for cultural diversity, religious diversity, age diversity, LGBTIQ diversity. It's ultra diverse community, and at the moment all throughout the West is experiencing huge growth, particularly in those interface areas with the rural areas. So we have Wyndham and Melton as part of the municipal area, and they are one of the fastest growing 15 babies born a day type, areas of Melbourne. There's lots of internal migration. So lots of people will move from the inner west. They might settle in the inner west, so Footscray. I'm living in Footscray. They might settle in this area and then move out as, the families grow and develop. They move out to new housing developments in the outer west. And there is this connection across generations around this internal migration of the West. So there's this connected stories about the West, through history and currently, and the pathways that people make through the West, are connected. So often, you might talk in municipal boundaries, but that's kind of people, find pathways through these municipal kind of arbitrary boundaries. We have been exposed to discourses of disadvantage and, all of those, some of you may have seen, in the newspapers, African gangs, in my day when I was doing youth works on the street, it was Vietnamese and, blah, blah, blah. So all this kind of incredibly destructive discourses of disadvantage influence how people perceive the West, which is a problem because I've always lived here and it's like, what are you talking about? It doesn't really reflect my experience and understanding of the strengths within this community. Currently, the inner West in particular is experiencing huge gentrification, and that's a bit of a shift and change, and something that the area is dealing with, and it brings up issues around housing and access to rental properties and homeless, all of those complicated things that come with gentrification of areas. But yes, I just want to also end it on just saying the West has incredible community strengths and huge amounts of creativity. Now, I want to talk about my life pursuit, and that is generally it's about understanding and facilitating the complex dynamics of generational and social change. So that is a lived experience pursuit, and that is a commitment, a lifelong commitment. And so it reveals itself in the work that I choose to do. And I really love the work that I do. Now, and community development is a powerful, powerful approach, and I've been doing it for 35 years. So to see, people that I've worked with, all those 2 generations ago, and where they are in the trajectory of their lives because of this kind of approach to working with communities. The thing that it is really underpinned by is a strong values base. And I'll have a little conversation about that in a minute. Now, I just wanted to just a little bit of a story. I met Sharon actually in I think it was 2019, Sharon. It was before the pandemic, just before the pandemic. So when we went to conferences, and it was up in the beautiful Parramatta, which is like a sister city to my heartland. So I was really happy to be there. And I went up with Catherine Dwyer, who works she's the community development coordinator at Maribyrnong City Council and has been working in the participation, inclusion inclusion and community leadership space for years, and we've been co-colleagues in exploring this as a space for the Inner West. And I'm absolutely delighted to meet with Sharon and start that kind of journey in around complexity thinking, and connecting up the kind of community development work into this kind of complex adaptive systems thinking. And it just opened up new kind of vistas for me. And then in March of this year, I was able to join with Emily the Complex Systems Leadership Program. And he really kind of spent some time exploring complexity theory and complex adaptive systems theory. And it's been quite exciting because, you know, as I got deeper into and explored some of the materials, I noticed some fabulous things that aligned with my community development work. And so I just want to, if we go to the next slide, yes. So one thing that are really community development or working in the social change space, it's never simple. Sometimes it's complicated and you can unpack things and contain things, but it's just not, doesn't quite kind of pick up on the work, or the actual practice of it is to move towards the social change, the systems change element. It just shifts into another dimension, so it's always complex. And that was an important realisation, because it kind of actually allowed me to strengthen some of the ideas, some of my practice principles, and some of the ideas that community development brings into this, but also, I don't know, freed me up to be thinking about community development in a more systems change way. So I noticed some similarities. So one of the kind of common terms that we talk about in that good community development workers will talk about is this idea of holding chaos, and it's a kind of recognition that you are working in this complex system, multiple layers all at once, not necessarily causal or this logical kind of progression. We would have had it solved all by now had it been the case. So this holding chaos is a really kind of important term in community development, and sometimes you'll hear about in youth work, in other human services work, we talk about herding cats, and it's just this kind of, you know, unpredictability, complexity, uncertainty, and so it's being quite comfortable in sitting with uncertainty and holding it and working with it and being alive in a sense to the dynamism of the work, and so being really responsive and available and open to the possibilities within the work. You're always wary of cascading effects, and one of the kind of ethical responsibilities is that there isn't any unintended consequences. So really kind of watching cascading effects, you're aware of the interdependencies and the unpredictability of the work. But, you know, at the heart of community development is also this idea of thinking ecologically. And, you know, in social work, in community development work, this ecological, holistic approach has always been part of the conversation, and understanding that there are multiple intersecting networks, sectors and systems at play, and being able to, you know, work within those systems, understand those systems, fold in those systems in a way, being able to understand that. And I guess there's some echoes that I saw around social capital, so the glue that holds communities together, and the idea of bonding social capital, bridging and linking social capital, and that part of the work is thickening those networks. and making those kind of connections. And understanding that peoples and communities hold multiple interests at once, you know, so having one, it's not one identity, it's multiple identity and multiple kind of interests. And so that idea of intersectionality has been really important part of community development. And that will come in later, and I'll show you around subsystems how that comes into the tool, because that's been really super, that little find. So another fabulous thing that I kind of noticed in the complexity theory work was that it freed you up from thinking about and helped you to challenge with some kind of understanding and framework the idea of command and control and hierarchies. Yeah. And so, of course, community development questions this, because that's part of the neoliberal framework and, you know, alienating framework. It's something that we, you know, critique quite strongly. But, you know, understanding that there, you know, there's reason for proliferation and distributed networks and the distributed nature of action, and that in itself can shift systems. That was quite liberating, finding, you know, out some of the reasoning behind that. And of course, community development works with social movements and systems change. There's some big picture stuff that we want to have changed, and it's big, and sometimes that's overwhelming. But another thing that I notice is this idea of thresholds and tipping points. You don't have to change everything and everyone. You just have to move to thresholds and tipping points. And that's the part of the shifting the systems. And that can be internal mindsets, discourses of the mind, but also behaviours in the real world, networks in the real world, and ways of doing things in the real world. So that's kind of what I kind of noticed. And I went down a rabbit hole. An exciting rabbit hole, and there's a beautiful, I'll put it into the chat later on, or someone else can, but there's a beautiful map of complexity science. And complexity science, let me tell you, is complex. And the Castellani map will let you, you know, see what that actually looks like. And mind you, the map is not the territory, which is a beautiful quote that I like about that. It's an attempt to explore, so it's exploratory. But the rabbit hole going for me was about going into depth into community development theory and practice and seeing what the touch points were. And I saw a lot of touch points and got super excited. Next one. So I just wanted to just very quickly give you a few mantras in community development that I think, you know, inform my work, but also are kind of touch points with the complexity theory, and also help me with the tool and the focus areas. Now, these mantras, I'm going to say, are informed by, you know, many CD scholars, and here I draw on the beautiful work of Jim Ive, Susan Kenny, and Peter Westerby, who are marvellous. And I think in their language and intent talk about complexity in such artful and beautiful ways. But also it draws on the work of Cormac Russell, John McKnight, and Jodie Kretzmann, the Yeater Institute, the beautiful women, Michelle Dunscombe and Dee Brooks, Lloyd Martin from New Zealand, and Jim Deers, who I'm just going to say that, you know, Jim Deers' contribution for me, a highlight for me, is who'd want to have a meeting when you can have a party? So I just, you know, also instilling the fun in in this work. So here are some key kind of mantras that I think are important. This idea of mutual interest and mutual respect. And I'm going to come back to that quote, when your liberation is bound up with mine. Yeah, so that's from Lila Watson, and it's, you know, if you're here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you're here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. And I think that informs that mutuality of the work. It's also about this interdependency and interconnectedness. So it challenges individualism. So it's always about self/others, never separated. And it's not, and this, the quote of "it's not just about you" relates to the active citizenship that work that I do. So it's never the individual, it's always the collective. And remembering that the relationship is the work, it's dialogical, and that you move at the speed of trust. So there's all sorts of elements there about the work, and you always start with what is strong and not what is wrong. So this is often in complexity or wicked problem exploration, you might focus on a problem, but you can also focus on an opportunity. And this strengths approach is really a key principle in community development. And we have processes that are around connect, discover, dream, and act. And it's always act is always part of it. And that appreciative inquiry approach of discover and dream. So that's surfacing innovation, surfacing, you know, assets and strengths within the community. There's always going to be common shared rights, self-determination, and community-led is important, and that comes through in the tool. And a core part of this self-determination idea is nothing about me without me. So the diversity here is the lived experience and having people up at the table, and always seeking who's not being heard, who can give us another perspective to, you know, complexify things in some ways. Do no harm, make things better. So it's about shifting into, you know, change, transformation and change is really important. And so Jim Ive talks about social and ecological justice and holism being really important, this ecological kind of framework and post-enlightenment. And I think that relates to the complexity, relational approach of CD work. Diversity is critically important, and it's about it being distributive and generative. And diversity, the answers for the problems are in diversity, not groupthink. Start where people are at, yes, but don't leave them there. You know, it's always that commitment to kind of change, and it's purposeful, it's intentional. Yeah, so it is about curiosity, it's about learning, it's about consciousness raising, which is an old idea in community development, but it's still relevant. It's about reflecting, growing, creating, and transformation. And it's for the long game. Some of the big changes that people want and that the community leaders that I work with want are long game processes, and they're complex processes. So that was a quick 101 mantra kind of walk in community development, and I want to go to some of these might sing to you. Some of these mantras you might use in your practice. It, you know, might be relevant to, you know, some of the work in social impact work, some of the regenerative work people are doing, you know, some of the social entrepreneurial type work. So some of these ideas do span across different sectors. I want to roll on now to you know, the tool for systemic change. And there's two things that I found really fantastic about that was, yes, the rabbit hole and the connection points with community development practice, but also that the tool was a great way of collating, visualizing, grouping things together to be able to show the visual workings of an ecosystem and the work and action that was at play. So Sharon and Emily will talk about solution ecosystem. And it's fantastic for that. I'll come to that later after the break, and we'll take you through a walkthrough. But the tool for systemic change has these focus areas. So 9 focus areas, and that underneath all of those, it breaks down to 36 characteristics. I haven't put the 36 characteristics. It's too much for me. But I will talk to you about these 2 areas. So the first 5 is where the community development, it's all, I can see community development, echoed through the whole of those 9 focus areas. But key part of the work is 1 to 5. And then the 6 to 9 is something about governance and that governance level. So I just want to talk about, I'm just going to pull up something here. The first focus area. So create a disequilibrium. I'm just going to quickly just touch points into community development that I've found really useful. Create a disequilibrium state is the first one. And this is gathering your community around what they care enough about to act upon. Yeah, that's from Cormac Russell, but unpacking that. So that here it's all the group processes and group dynamics, creating safe and brave spaces for risk-taking and creativity. Yeah, so it's kind of, this is the scene setter and bringing a group meaningfully together. You shift from the individual collective. This is classic CD, from the personal to political. As classic CD speaks, self and other, interdependent beings, where your liberation is bound up with mine, aligned action. It sits in there, and how through the characteristic you pull that into being is there. Leveraging strengths and opportunities, that's the connect, discover, dream, act. Passion is a strength. Passion, what gets you through. Passion is the motivation to tackle this beyond yourself in collectivities, yeah? It's the skin in the game, it's the mutual interest, yeah? And that's the diversities that intersect. It's a learning process. So those kind of key learning, you're noticing patterns and tendencies of the system. You're unpacking these. There is the personal, political, the consciousness raising, the dialogue work. They're reflecting, unpacking, framing, reframing, reclaiming work that goes on. You often and must examine power and how systems create experience of inequality, disadvantage, marginalisation, alienation. We unpack privilege, barriers and enablers. So that all happens in this focus area. 1. Place is important, so the geographical boundaries. My defined boundaries are the west of Melbourne, and place-based work is important as well. Connection to country is important. Build community. This is the community building aspect. So build ownership, build community, start where people are at, but don't leave them there. Broad goal for, you do establish some broad shared goal for change, but you're open about the means that you're going to get there. So that's emergent. That will come from the group work, from the work that you do from below or from the ground up. Secondly, we've got amplify action. This is bread and butter, absolute bread and butter of community development work. So yes, this is about action and doing. Small scale, suck and see is classic term. Pilots, demonstrations. Small is beautiful idea as well. So safe to fail, safe to trial. Let's try, let's play. Let's play here. So relationships are the work. peer-to-peer, thicken networks, know the landscape, fold in opportunities, build social capital. Collective action is CD Playbook 101. ABCD, asset-based community-driven development, comes into that. Build share interest, build ownership. We also bring into play diversity and intersectionality, and you must resist the tendency to simplify. What can I say? Neoliberalism and way that Enlightenment thinking is seductive. We want control. It's so seductive. But just be wary. Don't go to that tendency to command and control. Proliferate. Distributive. Yeah, that energy, that dynamic energy is valuable. Focus area 3, encourage self-organisation. Again, community building, community leadership, nothing about me without me comes into it, and the learning cycles continue. Reflection, debrief, the ABCD cycles, again, self-organisation. Focus area 4, stabilise feedback. So this is the problem solving, the reflection cycles, adapting, ABCD, system stewards, allies, community leadership, accountability to each other, monitoring, communicating. That's all happening in that section. Area 5, enabling information flows. Knowledge is power, information is power. Yeah, so continual learning cycles, power analysis and critical reflection, adapting, being the principle of diversity, inclusion and participation is really important. Removing barriers for participation, inclusion are important. Always on the eye of that one. Dialogue, important not to get into groupthink or ossifying behaviours. So mindful of that. I'm just going to whip through areas 6 to 9. Basically, this is about public governance, public admin, elected governments and the interface with community. Here it's about participatory democracy and systems advocacy. This is really key features of community development. It's from below and inside out, yeah? Advocate and influence, so you deepen. Community building in a way is, you know, when you have someone doing the juggler, the person who spins the plates and starts one plate and then gets the next plate going and, you know, and somehow gets the next plate going. I don't know how they do it, but what that first plate, they get started. I've seen someone do this. So that's community building. That is perpetual. That's what you do all the time. You keep that going. At some points then you go into mobilising and generating, so it becomes a little bit self-perpetuating. You know, you're not necessarily, you know, supporting that in a full way, so that's perpetual. And then another layer is this advocating and influence layer, and it gets, you know, deeper, more dispersed, more connected, systems wide. You're building allies, building alliances. The idea of street level workers is fantastic, and that strategic alignment. You can see shifting and influencing, you know, strategy, what goes ahead, and aligning to some of the strategies that particularly I work with local government mainly, so aligning to localised strategies and making sure that the community leaders I work with actually a part of shaping that strategy from the very beginning is really important. So you have really virtuous loops of influence happening. And also, may I say that some of the elected representatives will actually be some of my community leaders who've been through that kind of system as well. So that's that 101. And I wanted to... I don't know, I see these links really strongly, and I'm really interested in hearing if others in the group have their own, their own mantras or their own touch points or echoes of practice when they're exploring some of this complexity science and complexity theory. Does that make sense?
That's terrific, Helen. That's fantastic. And yeah, Helen, you're quite a force of nature, I think. And I'm very, very pleased to know that I've got a champion like you in Melbourne's West. I'll be calling on you shortly to take that train out of the station again, because it's quite a presentation. I'm sure everyone's really quite overwhelmed, but also, like, I think what you really showed is a strength of community development, which is a translation piece. It's that ability to translate and connect people who think differently, who come from diverse perspectives. Like, that's a key defining trait of people who succeed in community development. And what you've done is taken those, focus areas, the characteristics, which, very much academically anchored, but you've given a really colloquial kind of translation of them. And I think a lot of people in this room would have really valued that and appreciated that. And I'm sure Emily's taken notes on how to refine some of the comms with how we talk about, complex and these elements. So I'm going to slow down the breath for a bit and just ask the group. Perhaps some questions have come to mind. Like, how do you connect? I think, Helen's question is, how do you connect with the focus areas, with the way of thinking? I certainly, the message from Helen's work is, community development's been around for a long time, and people with grey hair like us can say things like that. But this language and sort of like the momentum and engagement with this thinking is new. It is getting credibility. It's bringing perhaps credibility to, community development workers who perhaps haven't been listened to as strongly said in the past. So this is an opportunity for questions. I'm looking through the chat. Lots of congratulations. Awesome. Of course she is. Any questions or comments? If not, it is a big group. I'm going to ask Emily, can we go into some breakout rooms, maybe to facilitate some deeper conversation? So we will go into smaller groups, only for a few minutes, because that's all we have, and then we'll come back. But I think that's a way to take some of the sort of, what do you call it? Performance anxiety out of being in front of a large group. So accept the invitation to a smaller group, and we'll come back in probably just over 5 minutes, but hopefully that's time for people to connect with Helen's presentation. I'll see you soon.
All right, everyone's on their way.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Do you think we'll have time to show something of the tool, a visual?
Emily, are you doing that?
Yeah, if we've got time, definitely. I've got it all ready to show.
Can you just choose something, because I can't do it on the phone, but can you just just visually show, something?
I'll show your
things that.
I think
Emily, have everyone in the room seen it? Like, is it need to be shown?
There's many people here. There's a number of participants.
Okay.
So I might just show
The ecosystem map's nice as well.
Yeah, I'll show that.
And the transition card if you want. So
I'll show that. So cool. We'll come back in. Are we going for
show whatever you think kind of visually kind of communicates, because I can't control everything.
I know, I've got full control of everything today, haven't I?
Are you going to show Helen so Helen can talk to it?
Yeah, I've got Helen's all up, so it's all ready to go, and I'll show.
Well done, Helen. That was amazing.
It was great.
And I'm so glad I'm not in a breakout group, because I would have started rattling on, because like this came from community development. It came you've read the active citizenship paper, know what I mean? Like,
yes,
the whole thing came from community leaders and tracking community leaders.
Oh, wait a second. Can we pause recording?
Oh
yeah. For those at home. Okay.
Can you do an edit?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for returning to us. I hope you had a good conversation with some of your peers. I've asked Emily to speak to Helen's project and how she's used the tool, just to finalise our time together today. It's a really great project. So, Emily, over to you. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Helen, for all the data input into your account that I get to show off today. So actually, it was Nick's decision to show the dashboard so that you could see how boring numbers are. So what you're looking at here is when you land in, you know, we've got 2 transition cards that is bringing together 68 initiatives that are tackling a bunch of different problems with 38 organizations that are collaborating in them. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. So what the transition cards do, which is what I'm just going to zoom out here. So Helen's put together a transition card. Her place-based boundary is the west of Melbourne, and her wicked opportunity is active citizenship and community leadership within that place-based boundary. And so she's got these 68 initiatives that are on her transition card, and she's just working through her mapping process where she's going through each one of those different coloured tiles and articulating how the initiatives, which are on the left-hand side, how they're contributing to those characteristics which sit within the focus areas. So think back to when she was talking through, Helen was so passionately and beautifully talking through the focus areas of 1 to 9. Each one of these coloured blocks represents the focus areas with the characteristics that sit underneath that. And I was just remarking to Helen before that I've never seen a transition card where so many initiatives tick off or contribute to so many different characteristics for systems change. Like there's just, you know, it's like a big colourful rainbow. So the other thing that, and I'm just going to zoom in here, that is really impressive is the 38 organizations. So, you know, whilst we know there's 38 organizations contributing on these 68 initiatives, what does that look like in terms of that bridging capital that she was talking about, the connections between the organizations that are working on the different parts of this system? So the ecosystem map is visualizing the structure of that network of those partnering organizations that are working on it. And as you can see down here, the legend helps you color code and see who they are in terms of a sector type, who they are in that place-based boundary and working together. And we've got the social enterprise, hot house community projects, which is Helen's organization centre, partnered with Track C as well, who you can see a very close connection there. But the other thing that was really so excited to see was the number of Indigenous owned and led organizations that were in this network. So like hats off to that's obviously, you know, the visual representation of your values and how you do your community development practice, Helen. So yeah, incredible.
Fantastic.
Incredible work. I think, did I get that in? The other thing that I can quickly show, which I was also really excited to see, but sorry, my internet is really slow, is that Helen, you've done your Sustainable Development Goal alignment card, where Helen has mapped those same 68 activities across the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm just going to move everyone's lovely face. And looking at all those projects and how they're contributing to the targets that sit underneath the 17 development goals, to then be able to represent that as a whole of system view against the contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then also what is very cool is when we look at those as an integrated set of targets and goals, where targets are contributing to targets under one goal or also to contributing to the success of another goal, we can see that across that, there are 4 other goals that indirectly all those activities, an extended contribution, which I think is also an incredible picture.
Wow.
It's great to hear that.
Can I just ask a question about that part?
Yeah.
We're looking at that element in particular around, one activity contributing to multiple things, but the logic of it is also important. I mean, in a way of what does it mostly do versus what does it do a little bit of versus, so some things, I'm trying to think of an example. So I don't know, building a playground for us, for instance, we're a council, so building a playground, the big hairy goal that it contributes to is probably well-being and community interaction, but it also, you could have an environmental overlay on that. If you look at water capture and water reuse, you could have a whole range of other things that go. So we sort of, in our thinking, we're going, oh well, it's mostly about the well-being and the community building side of it, but there's these other things that happen, and it's just to give an emphasis around that and trying to understand is if, we're working with the business analysts, so they're going like, is it 50% and 12% and 2%? Like they're trying to really corral it down. And we're saying, well, you can't really do that, but you can sort of say it's more this than it is that. And that discussion is actually, it's good to have that discussion anyway, but I'm just wondering if that looks like it represents that sort of in that way.
Yeah, it does. It's a connected, what it's representing is the interaction. It's not creating a weight in terms of, it's saying that it's contributing to this other goal.
Yep.
But directly, it ticks off a target that sits under another goal.
Yep.
But that target is supporting through. Sharon had some great words that she used on Wednesday night, wasn't it, Sharon? I mean, I'm really putting you in it right now, but there was like an extended contribution, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, and also the thing is, like, it contributes in different ways. So it could be a direct contribution. It could be creating a context for things to happen.
Yep.
The weighted area, like I do have a bit of an issue with the whole weighting, because you can have, if you've got your head in complexity science, you can have, one small thing can make such a big difference. So to weight it, you're kind of like going back into this reductionist kind of world. And so I think the conversation to show the interrelationships is the important part, to start the contribution, to start the discussions about contributions. The underpinning framing of the Wicked Labs SDG network map, it comes from LeBlanc's network of, so there's like the SDGs and the SDG targets can be the process, but they can also be the thematic problem areas. So the network map focuses on the problem areas, and it's actually the network that was created at the time that the United Nations developed the development goals. So it's actually there is a paper on it from the United Nations. So if you're interested in having a look at that, but I think it's more of a discussion point, because I don't think you can reduce it down to being weighted. Because it is complexity. The SDGs, often these complex problems that we're talking about with complexity are represented as the SDGs. So it's that same thinking with regards to complexity.
Thank you.
No problem.
Fantastic, but great insight, Stuart, and great question, because that's the kind of translation piece that we do in explaining, well, what does a transition card actually represent? And certainly its greatest value is seeing your blind spots and working out, well, where does more activity need to be? And then as we all mature, our even approach to that weighting question, or whether we're doing enough here or there, well, that's part of the evolution and the journey that we'll be on as we start making an impact to the change we want to see. Look, we're a couple of minutes over. Thank you all. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks all for being patient initially with the technical issues, but wasn't it a force of nature from Helen today? I want to thank Helen for your talk. It was really grounding, I think, for a lot of those who are doing community development to know that this stuff matters and it's getting new traction and new meaning, particularly for perhaps authority that hasn't listened to this way of thinking and doing. And it's great to have this partnership with Wicked Lab to really build this momentum and this community of practice, which we have here. So thanks all for being part of it. And we'll see you next time. Emily, do you have any final words?
I do. So for those who are watching from home, thank you for also making the time to watch the recording. I just want to say a really big heartfelt thanks to Helen for that presentation and for reminding us about, you know, that this stuff isn't new, but we can have new ways of describing things and demonstrating the impact. And it is just like such a joy to be able to support you and work with you, and just gave me so much pleasure listening to you today. So I'm going to stop talking. The other thing I'm going to say, just as a plug, is that Helen participated in our complex systems leadership program. We are currently updating that for a next generation, which we're going to launch early next year. And I will send out information with this recording to everyone who came with us today. So grateful for everyone's time. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks so much.